I want to welcome back to the show Nicole Heals. Now, Nicole, today we're going to talk about some finance stats and particularly how they relate to women. So welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So these stats were put together by Leah Shadell, who was actually on episode 5. So let's jump straight into them. So what I want to do, Nicole, is read out a few stats and then just get your thoughts or your opinion around them. So these first ones are stats that relate to women and their comfort level with money. So the first one is that women aged 28 to 59 who live with a partner, only 39% say they are solely responsible for money management in their household. Doesn't seem like a lot. What are your thoughts on that?
I still think it's funny. We're all sort of moving along into the sort of equality direction, which is great. But I do think there is a default to let your partner look after the finances, which is not really where you should be at this point in time. I think you've got to take into account the fact that your health and your wealth are your own responsibility. So I'm not surprised by those figures. I'm a bit disappointed though, I suppose.
Yeah. And that probably leads in pretty nicely to stat number 2, saying that 52% of women find that dealing with money is stressful and overwhelming. 34% say dealing with money is boring. And that's a large proportion of women who are obviously not comfortable and or not interested in money. And that goes back to, I guess, episode 1, where we really spoke around women not being or want to be engaged with money. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think what we've got to do as an industry, as a financial advice industry, is make sure that we're talking to women in the language that they understand, and keep it simple and clear and concise and interesting to get people, encourage them to start getting a bit more activated with their finances. I think the reality is we all deal with money every day. We have been dealing with money for years. So I think women have, are sort of more focused on the micro managing of money, the day-to-day expenses or the family budget. I think the long-term or the medium-term financial planning aspect of it, I think that is where that starts to get a bit overwhelming. And I think I'm not sure why that is, but I think it's just because we just don't learn this stuff at school. This is a problem. I mean, we're all expected to have this sort of basic financial literacy, but we don't actually get taught it unless you're interested in it, like I have been, and I've gone out and made sure I learn everything I can about it. But that's a passion of mine, so not everybody has that. So these kind of podcasts are just brilliant, so people can actually get a bit more of a handle on finances and get a bit more activated with them, because money per se isn't anything. It's really, there's no real value in money unless that's what you can do with it. So I sort of try and get women that I speak to talk about the benefits of what your money can do for you, not money in itself, and then focus on the benefits, focus on the goals, and the reality is money makes the world go around. We need it. It gives us choice. So if we start talking about choice and benefits and options and all those sort of things, it's more likely that we might get people more activated into looking at their finances a bit better.
Absolutely. And look, as you said, that's exactly what this podcast is aiming to do, develop that level of competence. And I guess when you start to develop that level of competence, then the confidence flows with it. And I just look at my own wife's situation, and when we got together, probably wasn't a great deal of interest to her around the money side of things. But over time, with my encouragement, she's really got very interested in it, to the point that she's well across it and knows everything that's going on with our finances. So that's just my little personal story.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's fantastic. And you know what? I'm sure there'd be a lot of partners, husbands out there that would love to share the well, I mean, that's, dealing with your money. I think that is something to be able to share in a relationship, and you're both on the same page that way. So if one of you is not around, if one of you is sick, then you can pick up the slack for each other and support each other. And that way, I think it's a really nice way to balance out the responsibility in a relationship
and
too.
Look, the reality is that men, I wouldn't suggest, would necessarily know more than women. It's probably just maybe they think it's a quote unquote manly thing to do, so automatically take control of those finances. And I would imagine that women would approach finances with a different perspective from men. You know, the whole men are from Mars, women from Venus, and you combine the two together and you'd probably get a better overall picture about how the money should be managed.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a hangover from the 50s. Women haven't necessarily been working for that long. In fact, I was talking about this last week with some female friends of mine, and it's a change in culture that has, our grandparents, our grandmother may not have been working. That's only two generations ago, and certainly their mothers may not have worked. So there's a change and a shift in the way that society is functioning now, and it is, women didn't used to work, and so we've got this hangover from the olden days of the man will look after the money and the women look after the household. Well, it just doesn't work. It doesn't need to be that way anymore, because particularly if you're making your own money, I mean,
Absolutely.
why would you expect someone else to look after it for you? I mean, it'd be like saying, go to work for me,
Yeah, no, exactly. Times have changed.
They have changed, and I actually think going forward, probably the next generation, these conversations hopefully won't be as though the stats will be more sort of 50-50, because I think it'll sort of fade away eventually. But I think it's just a hangover from previous sort of cultures, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I wonder if that lack of focus translates into those financial outcomes, because if you look at gender inequality when it comes to money, and we covered off on superannuation in one of the earlier episodes, and as you were saying, we've got a great system in the world, one of the best systems in the world. There's obviously areas for improvement, but generally speaking, pretty good. But when we look at the financial position of men and women through superannuation, it's saying that women are 2.5 times more likely than men to live in poverty in their old age, and 90% of women will retire with inadequate savings to fund a comfortable lifestyle. So obviously we know that women on average tend to live longer than men, but there's got to be more to it than that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a few things around that. Probably the reasons why that's happening is that women do tend to gravitate towards careers and roles that are not as well paid, apart from, so for example, caring roles, nursing, teaching, being carers. So that those roles traditionally don't pay as much as other roles. That's one thing. The other thing is if you're going away and having 5 years off or a couple of years off to have children, you can end up with between $50,000 and $80,000 less in your super, because you're not paying super while you're on maternity leave. Also, when you go on maternity leave, or you are the carer of the family, like you may be looking after your children, you may be looking after your parents, your parents-in-law, your siblings or friends, anything like that. If the more time you take away from your work and your career, the less opportunity you have to stay perhaps on the career path that you may not want to. Women may have more of a balanced approach to life as well, as far as a family is just as important as a job and everything else. Men are probably more focused towards the career, just as a generalisation. So, so there's a few things like that, and I think we have got a lot of headwinds that we have to sort of deal with. So we're getting paid less. We take time off work to look after other people, which takes us out of the career flow, which makes it a little bit harder to get back in. If you have to have flexible hours to pick up kids or to look after people, that also affects what you can earn. And women aren't as good as men are at promoting themselves and talking about how good they are. I mean, we just don't have that. That's just not in our DNA. That's something we really have to work on. So that's something that, as a sort of a professional development, I think women have to start focusing on those things, because we can be our own worst enemy as far as that goes, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Look, I'll pick up on a few things you said there. You spoke around that $80,000 gap, and I would imagine that's translating from that magic of compound, which I've spoke about in previous episodes. And I think you're right. I think generally speaking, they say that if men look at going for a job and they look at all their requirements and they may not fill all, but they think, oh, look, I'll give it a crack. Whereas women feel as though they need to fill every single one of those requirements before they feel confident to go for the role. So I think you're right. I think there is a big element of that. But it's interesting. I was doing a bit of research and you're talking around that time out having maternity leave, and I have absolutely no affiliation with Grow Super, but I did notice that they offer 6 months fee-free for primary caregiver of a child when they take that time off. So I think maybe there is a shifting of mindset and perception around supporting women a little bit more around that motherhood journey.
Oh, definitely. And look, there's corporations, I know, I won't name them, but there are corporates that I know out there that are actually making sure female or if the guy decides to stay home and look after the kid, whoever's not working, whoever's not, making the money and looking after the children, they are actually making sure that their super's getting paid while they're on maternity or paternity leave. So that's fantastic. So, because the reality is we've got to look, you've got to take care of the carers, These are the people that are putting themselves out to be the carers of the next generation or the generation before them, and you really have to make sure that they're being looked after. And I think I'll just make a point now too, is that the whole of the superannuation and everything that's been set up is still, it's based on 1950s sort of ideals that everybody stays in a relationship for their whole life. Like, everybody has that one job that they go up the ladder and they, people don't move around and people stay in a relationship and they have one marriage and one set of children and all that sort of stuff. Well, that doesn't necessarily happen anymore. So, I mean, it's lucky if it does, and that's great, but there's enough evidence to show that doesn't work. And unfortunately, the saddest thing that's happening in Australia at the moment is women over 55 are the demographic that are where the homeless is actually increasing. So they haven't superannuation only came in the 80s anyway. So before the 80s, unless you're a teacher or worked for the government or something like that, you didn't have superannuation. So these women who are retiring now haven't had the opportunity to have money going into super for their entire working career, and that's another reason why they're suffering without enough superannuation to retire on. So we have to start, and this is why I love doing these sort of things and why I focus on helping women with their finances, because we have to make sure that people are educated to understand that we are going to have to pay for our own finance, our retirement. Like I'm saying, with the headwind, it's a pension too. Like our grandparents and now maybe our parents had this thought process that, we've worked our whole lives, we've paid our taxes, we're going to get our pension paid out. Well, that's also not necessarily going to be true going forward, because the baby boomers it's across the whole of the world. It's not just Australia, but there's a massive demographic shift for all these people to be going from being workers to paying tax, things like that, to actually going to be retired. And the whole world is dealing with this situation that there's going to be a lot of people on social security and governments can't afford to keep paying. So we have to get our heads out of the sand and just go, look, this is the reality. Let's see what we can do to make our lives good now and just as good in the future.
It's probably about taking control of your own destiny, and it flows in nicely to a stat I saw that said that on average women will retire with less than half the super balance of men, and 1 in 3 will have little or no super. So that ties into exactly what you're saying. So what can women do to protect themselves, or at least try to minimise that impact?
Well, I think, get educated. I mean, I know it's difficult to find. Like I'm going to mention, I think we'll probably mention at the end as well, but ASIC Money Smart website has got so much free information on it that's available for everybody. You can get online and start reading up about what is superannuation, what do I need. You can go on. Google's the best thing ever, so you can Google how much money do you need for a comfortable retirement? What does that look like? I can give you some stats at the moment that sort of if you want to retire at 65 and you're a single person, you need about $640,000 in super to when you retire, as well as your house has got to be paid off. Now, not many people are retiring on that now. And in fact, to be honest, the only people that have got that much money in super are really well paid, or university professors who have been paid 17% super since they've started. So that they're lucky. So I think it's always trying to find ways to save money, and also always trying to find ways to put more money into super, so that it's you can't touch the money once it's in there. So that's a pro and a con of super, but it's there for your retirement. So I'm a big believer in putting a little bit away, and even if you could just put 5% extra into your super, just to help you down the track. And if you go through a process of being separated or divorced, make sure that you don't walk away and say, well, my husband worked more hours than I did, because you're actually devaluing your position in the family when you've been looking after the children and things like that. So make sure that you look at all your finances. And sometimes what I say to people, I mean, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a family lawyer or anything like that, but what I see is the women get the houses and the men get the super a lot of the time, because the women end up with the children and the men don't. But that doesn't actually work for either of them, because then the men don't have any money to buy another property to live in, and they can't access their super depending on what age they are, and the women get a house that they can't actually afford to run because they don't have a big job. So those sort of things, you've got to really be careful about all these sort of big life changes, and get proper advice, and understand, and find somebody that you actually like talking to. Don't feel intimidated. I think that's one thing I wish I could have every woman in the world not being intimidated by asking questions that look after themselves, and their family.
Yeah.
So,
no, absolutely. Yeah. Very, very good points. And I wonder what role corporations have in this whole thing, because obviously if you've got a higher salary, then that's more super contributions. Because if you look at pay inequality, I looked up a stat that's saying that this is from February 2018, that the gender pay gap is still 15.3%. And if you look at Australia, South Australia had the lowest at 10.3, which is still, I think, is too high. WA had the highest at 22%. And actually your industry, the financial and insurance services, doesn't come out too well with the highest pay gap of 26%.
Yeah, it's outrageous that these numbers are still around. I don't know whether I was a little bit naive, or they sort of started. I think they started talking about this a little bit a few years ago. I think it was a bit under the radar for a while, but it's sort of become quite a topic of conversation. And there's a big movement around the world with women sort of having their say about things. And I think it's time for us to all sort of jump on that bandwagon and catch the wave and try and do whatever we can to get these numbers down, because it's absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely.
There's no reason why. And it's got to be like for like. I mean, it's obviously, if you're doing a high pressure job and somebody's not doing the same job, well, then that's different. But if you're both doing the same job, I have no idea why. I can't for 1 minute understand why there would be such a massive gap. And I don't think anybody else can. I think it's, it's how do you explain it? I mean, that's crazy.
No, absolutely, and I think it's a lot from that book. I'm sure people are familiar with it, by Sheryl Sandberg, and it's about asking for your seat at the table. When you look at the stat that only 23% of board members of ASX 200 companies are women, obviously there's still quite a bit of work to be done in that area.
Yeah, and I mean, these are the things. I mean, I'm actually doing, speaking of our industry, I'm doing some research with RMIT, because the reality in financial services is that there's only 20% female advisors as well. So I'm looking at why is that the case, and what's happening there. Are women getting stuck in support roles? Are they, or are they not? Is it a profession that we're not promoting properly through, or explaining the value of it? I mean, the Royal Commission hasn't helped anybody.
Yeah.
But there's also opportunity now to actually stand up when you're a good professional advisor and actually go, this is a brilliant career. You can really help people change their lives and for the better, and really improve people's finances. And so I mean, there's a lot going on, but I am still shocked about these figures. it's a quarter. I mean, our financial services industry is what it's a
Mm.
quarter.
Mm.
I could work 3 days a week and get. I mean, or that would be the choice. That's what I'd like to say to people.
Mm.
So, well, if you're only getting paid 3/4, why don't you just work 3/4 of a week, or go
No.
home at 3 every day, or whatever?
No,
It's
no,
not fair.
absolutely. But it's you're doing some great work yourself, Nicole, and really trying to raise awareness of those things and trying to empower women. So that's why it's so great to have you on this podcast.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Yeah.
If we look at women and relationships, and we all like to think that love lasts forever, but unfortunately, in some circumstances, it doesn't. And money is the second most common reason for relationship breakdown, and that's behind infidelity. And if you look at the stats again, the numbers speak for themselves. 7 out of 10 couples report that money causes tension in their relationship. So what are some of the things that, as a woman or as a couple, they can do to try and alleviate some of that stress?
Yeah, well, that is. Oh, look, okay. We're all individuals. I always say we're all little snowflakes. We're all different. We've all got different fingerprints, and we've all got different personalities, and we all think differently about money. That's just a logical thought process that everybody would think differently, because we are all individuals. So I think what you've got to do is really have a think about. You need to have a conversation about how you handle money, and everybody has a different money personality. And look, I think, it's a lot cheaper to go and see a financial advisor or a financial counselor than it is to get divorced. So I think sometimes it's easier to actually sit down with a third person and have those conversations, and maybe go through some questions and just work out, how do you feel about money? How do you feel about debt? How do you feel about spending? What are your values? And actually come to maybe you have the husband or the partner, and we can talk about girls, two girls in a relationship, one person might be the spender, one person might be the saver, but so you can probably have some sort of strategies around how do you make sure that doesn't end up in a fight, and then have a joint sort of money personality that you both compromise in the middle there. So maybe have a little slush fund that you both do what you want. If one of you loves saving for something big, then that's fine. The other one likes spending money on little things but never saves anything. But together you work to a common cause. But I do think you've got to have a conversation about it. You can't imagine what other people are thinking. I mean, it's hard enough to imagine what other people are thinking at any stage, but money, you can't work that out. And we've all come from different families. We've all come from different experiences. We've all made different mistakes. We've all had different victories, and we all need to sort of get to a page. So I think it's communication. And I think even if you just have to, if you can't do it yourself, some of these times these conversations are tricky. Pay for an hour and sit in front of an advisor. Sit in with an advisor for an hour in their office and go through some questions, and or a couple of hours, or have a couple of sessions or whatever, and actually come to a plan that makes sense to both of you, and work on it together. And you'll probably find you're closer after that than you were before.
Crazy thought. I mean, the stats, 7 out of 10 people say that money causes tension. So couples probably talk more about what they're going to have for dinner or what they're going to do that weekend, rather than actually about their financial future. And crazy thought, hey, sit down and talk to your partner.
I mean, it really is it's such a fundamental thing that you've got to get your head around. Money will make or break you, and I don't care about money per se. I'm not interested in it, but I am interested in it as a helping you create the life that you want, instead of being reactive, being proactive. Creating or designing what sort of lifestyle you want, and making the right choices so that you don't waste money on day-to-day things, that you can save money, or you can pay down your debt. You can do all these different things so that you can actually create some value and some excitement in your life, so that it doesn't feel like a dredge every week in, week out. And you actually, because you've got to reward yourself as well. I mean, if people come to see me and I'm say, oh, we like having holidays. Great, so do I. Fantastic. Where do you want to go? How does that work? So what do we have to do to save money to make that happen? So it's just got to be, we've got to take the taboo away from it. I don't really know why it was ever, it's a taboo subject, isn't it? It's a bit like religion or politics, and don't even start talking about politics in Australia. I mean,
right now in particular.
and it's funny. I mean, yeah. So I don't know. I think we've just got to shine some sunlight on it and get some conversations going, and make people realise that it is just one of those things. It's just like your health,
Absolutely.
and that's it. You know.
It's one of those things you said, they say money can't buy happiness, but I guess it buys you choices. So
Yeah.
you spend a lot of your practice really around helping women, supporting women, and empowering them to be able to make those financial decisions and take their own financial destiny in their own hands. So if someone wanted to speak to you or know more about you and what you do, how are they going to contact with you?
Oh, yes. Thanks, Mike. Yes, my website is called NicoleHealsFinancial.com.au. So just my name and the word financial. I kept that simple. I have a Facebook page as well as a LinkedIn page and an Instagram page. So please, contact me or connect with me on social media. Send me an email via my website. You can contact me through there, and I can sign you up to newsletters, or just link in or get on Facebook. And I update my social media probably 3 times a week, and try and keep everything very lifestyle focused. I don't talk about I don't talk about the boring math stuff. I talk about the benefits, the values, the choices, the experiences, and trying to get women excited about the end result.
Yep.
You know.
Perfect. Well, thank you as always, Nicole, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, Michael.